Hi, welcome to Art Salon. I'm Ellie Shore, and I've been organizing these salons since 2012, most of that time in person at the Armory Art Center, and now virtually. Art salons are a forum for artists, curators, and many others to develop a community of people who care deeply about contemporary art and who want to know more about the artists whose work they see in galleries and exhibition spaces throughout South Florida. It's also a chance to meet each other and share our thoughts, questions, and experiences. When our presentation begins, I ask that you use your imagination to sense the energy, whispering, laughter, and applause that would fill the room if we were still meeting in person. And now, I'd like to introduce tonight's artist, Rod Faulds. His talk is titled Photo-Based Art, Between Photography and Painting. Rod is well known to many of us as director of the University Galleries at FAU in Boca Raton for over 20 years. He's curated many fascinating and often challenging exhibits there. If you've been a student at FAU, you may have taken classes with him in museum studies or worked with him as an intern in the galleries. In the last few years, you may also have seen his photographic collages, which he's been exhibiting in curated exhibitions throughout the area. After Rod's presentation, we'll take a 5-minute break before the discussion begins. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce him to you, Rod Faulds. Take it away, Rod.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? It is a great pleasure to participate in this series. I am very thankful to Ellie Shore and to her partner, Jerry, who make this happen. And I certainly am very honored, given all of the really terrific artists that have presented before me. My presentation is going to be chronological for sure. It will also possibly feel like there's some jump cuts in there. Partly it has to do with the way I function, I suppose. But I do want to reflect, even though it very much is an artist talk, I do want to reflect that my career has totally been shaped by my work in presenting art, my work as a museum administrator. And you know, it took me a long time to actually realize that in many ways I've always been an artist, but I was never an arts administrator who was a frustrated artist. I've always very much loved the work of presenting other people's art. I think it's also really important to understand, or for me to admit, and in some ways it's both an admission that, you know, hey, I'm a privileged white guy in this world. I think it's really important that, you know, that one recognizes that. And I actually, through my work, have had, I think that is my work in museums, and I will talk about this because it's very important to me, an opportunity to attempt to give back to the community. I perhaps struggle with that in my art. You'll see it's not particularly socially or politically motivated, but let's get into it here. And I'm going to get this PowerPoint up. Okay. Certainly take note of my website if you like. A lot of what you're going to see tonight is there on the website, or at least in terms of the art. And I am, as I said, I'm starting way back in the 70s when I was an undergraduate. On the left-hand side here, you see actually an announcement for an exhibition of my work, notably, or I would like you to note that the announcement was designed to go in that plastic bag. The work on the right is a grid of transfer images a la Robert Rauschenberg. And another similar work, you're going to notice sort of grids, repeated images, and I am trying to make some kind of comment about media images. The work is definitely indebted to Robert Heineken, an important artist from Los Angeles. of the late 1960s who was definitely a very philosophical thinker about photography and the fact that photographs didn't need to be flat. You didn't need to be the maker of the photograph. That is, there were so many photographs out there in the world that you could just, in a sense, use them. So the first work I showed, and now the work on the left, is a movable work. The work on the right is actually a contact print of a magazine page. So you're seeing both images in negative from a magazine. And so it's basically showing you a woman on top of soda pop or beer bottles. Another thing that he did was to change or alter magazines, and in part to ask us about what's going on in the world. And so this horrific image of a North Vietnamese soldier with a decapitated head on an interior design magazine. And then this is a later version of those in color of a contact print of, again, a single magazine page. Another artist at the time, and all of these artists were included in an exhibition called, or several artists, but these three that were very important to me were included in an exhibition at the George Eastman House in 1967, when really photographic education in the university setting is just really beginning. The exhibition was called Persistence of Vision. This is, of course, Jerry Uelsman, who taught at University of Florida for years, who was an expert photomontageist in the darkroom. Ray Metzger out of Chicago, who combined images. I'm going to show you a few more images of his work. And I also had the pleasure, honor of studying briefly with Ellen Landweber, who was at Humboldt State University and who was perhaps the first artist using color Xerox technology. There were only black and white color machines at the time. And so she's, in a sense, scanning or copying real objects, combining them with, 19th century lithographic image of sorts. And this is a couple more examples of my work, again, gridded, coming off of magazines, again, very influenced by Heineken. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who later became, at the time, he was not the governor of California, here from a kind of pinup magazine for women, and a final work embedded in a plastic bag. That work didn't always go over well with the feminists, and actually that's one of the problems at Heineken's reception. He has not done well, although it, unfortunately, after his death, had a retrospective exhibition at Museum of Modern Art. I decided to go to California State University, Fullerton, a graduate program in exhibition design. This is a space designed by my mentor, Dexter Frankel, an exhibition of Japanese kimono, and basically learned, in a sense, how to deal with space. I had already been motivated by this as an undergraduate by taking a class not unlike the kind of class that I've taught at FAU. Presenting other people's work definitely kind of charged me up. Another exhibition that we did at FAU featured the LA Light and Space School. And even though this photograph, it's actually smart that this photograph is a little bit overexposed. In the middle of the photograph, there is a Robert Irwin disc. And that is a plexiglass disc of about 24 inches across, which is projected from the wall some 18 to 20 inches. But when you get close to that thing or halfway across the gallery, you can't really tell that it's an object. And the artists of this Light and Space School were very much interested in light being an art form and dealing with what were the edges of perception, or what is your visual equipment. This is an early James Turrell projection piece. And Turrell actually had studied perceptual psychology before becoming an artist, and has gone on to great fame in terms of how he uses light. That is his medium. Another really important artist from Los Angeles that has influenced me is Wallace Berman. You'll note that I work in grids a lot, and thus that's partly why I'm interested in Berman. It's also fascinating. He's very associated with the beat movement, and those are transistor radios in those hands, and he has collaged different images. And in a sense, his world, or he's sharing his world through these images of, or these transistor radios being the platform, a little bit like our computers. So one of the first exhibitions that I seriously curated was an exhibition of photography of 12 American photographers. It was called Object Illusion Reality. I had the pleasure of working with two professors who were part of the LA photo scene, Daryl Curran, Eileen Cowan. This is a much younger Rod Faulds, interacting with a Conrad Gleiber work. This artist was using the edge of books, in a sense, or the fact that you can put images on the edge of paper. Moving on, another exhibition that I did as a graduate student was an exhibition called Visions and Figurations in the late, it's like 1979, so it's responding to neo-expressionism, and it's trying to say, hey, you guys, artists on the West Coast, particular artists in the Bay Area, like Roy DeForest at the back of this slide, and then this image, Joan Brown on the right. These people have been doing figurative art for a lot longer than the Germans and Italians and New York artists who were gaining a lot of notoriety at the time. So out of this program, I purposefully went to the New England area, or I got a job, and I partly selected or applied for this job because it was close to a lot of places where one could study art history, and I needed to do a little bit more of that. Before I knew it, I was working at a place called the Williams College Museum of Art, which actually has a rather esteemed program in a graduate program in art history, and the undergraduate program in art history is also is quite famous for the people that have graduated out of it and the professors there. And I had the opportunity to employ these exhibition design skills. For example, here, an exhibition of international postmodern architecture from the German Architecture Museum. I was working with Thomas Krenz, who was the director there, who went on to be the director of the Guggenheim Museum, and also founded, or his idea for Mass MoCA, made Mass MoCA, which is perhaps the largest museum of contemporary art just down the street in North Adams, Massachusetts. I'm going to show you as we're going along certain artists that I think respond to, have looked at, and also in the kind of chronology. So here, Philip Tafe, a painter well-known in New York for many years. Note the pattern, the layering. Another Philip Tafe. Some of these works copied from the internet are not so crisp. I apologize. Jan Groover, a photographer using really simple objects, set up, fabricated for the camera, still life photography, basically. But I would say also very cognizant of a kind of abstract language of that this is a flat thing as we see it. Another Jan Groover. And John Copeland's, who I will talk a little bit more about. And actually, I'm segueing now into another photography exhibition that I never actually produced, but it was an exhibition really about self-portraiture. And John Copeland's, who started making work when he was 60 years old, photographed his aging body. Judith Golden, an artist from the West Coast, put herself into movie posters, and also embedded this kind of grid of flowers all over the pre-existing movie poster. Lucas Samaras, who is an amazing artist, both photographer, sculptor, and kind of hermetic being who made these crazy photographs of himself. They're manipulated Polaroids. Katharina Sieverding, who is a German photographer, makes these images of herself, obviously repeated, really large. She also makes films. You can kind of see that this, it's not surprising perhaps by looking at this image. and Yasamasa Morimura, who actually is an early digital artist. And he was always the subject of all of his works. And here he's obviously riffing on Manet's Olympia, and he is both figures in the painting. And he did a whole series of these Manets and other European masters. So at a certain point, I went to work for Thomas Krenz at the Guggenheim Museum. And I had the pleasure actually of designing this exhibition, Art, the Africa, or the Art of a Continent, an untypical Guggenheim show. I would point out, Tom was trying to mix things up, turn the gate, get more people in. And the thing that's kind of interesting about this exhibition, you know, painters tend to hate the Guggenheim. It was made for smallish paintings in the 50s. By the time it was built, everybody was making huge paintings, but it doesn't work so bad for sculpture of this scale. So it was an honor to have worked actually with an young African architect to do this exhibition. I also worked at the Brooklyn Museum briefly as their chief designer. And this is an exhibition called Converging Cultures that was a history of both Mexican and Peruvian art from pre-Columbian times up to the early 20th century. So Uta Barth would be another person that I'd be looking at the time. Although again, I'm not necessarily thinking that I'm going to make art. I really had stopped making art. I was very engaged in making exhibitions. But to me, this also relates to what I was saying about the LA Art and Space School. And Uta, who I want to say is the queen of the blur, says, the question for me always is, how can I make you aware of your own looking instead of losing your attention to thoughts about what it is you are looking at? That's another Uta Barth. And this is Onward to Florida. I took a job at FAU in 1997. And one of the first projects that I did was called Sightings in South Florida. And I don't want to make any claims that somehow I was doing relational aesthetics or trying to do things akin to relational aesthetics at the time. The point was really to get artists to do something that was relevant to the community. So I invited two artists, Terry from New York and another artist actually from the Williamstown area, and they researched and hung out in Florida for a while in order to come up with a project that they completed on site. So this is Terry Adkins interviewing Zenobia Jefferson, who was actually a teacher alongside of Zora Neale Hurston, who died in Fort Pierce. And this is Terry in Fort Pierce talking to her because he wanted to do a project about Zora Neale Hurston. And this is a part of the gallery that he created on site. Zora Neale Hurston was both an anthropologist and a writer, and torn between Florida and New York. And most of Terry's work actually is usually historically based, but he's a really strong contemporary sculptor. And unfortunately, Terry left us maybe 5 or 6 years ago. This is at the opening. He didn't like to stand around and drink wine, better to play his saxophone. He was actually quite an accomplished musician, and he actually recruited these students to participate in the opening performance. And this is the work by the other artist that dealt with cosmetic surgery, which is a phenomena that occurs a lot in South Florida. Something else that I'm proud of doing at the FAU galleries is inviting guest curators. It would be deadly boring, and I really wouldn't be able to do it anyways, to curate all of the exhibitions. So people like Omar Lopez Chahoud, who did this exhibition called Never Neverland, which is looking at commercialized fantasy, a la Disney mostly, with artists like Brian Toll, Bonnie Cholera, Jason Middlebrook, and many others. And then with an artist or a curator by the name of Barbaro Martinez Ruiz, who was studying African art at the time, at Yale, and actually 9 of the artists for this exhibition participated. And it was the first exhibition where I used all 3 of our spaces together. One of our galleries is a 5-minute walk away from the other. It's a little bit awkward. On the occasion of the first Art Basel Miami Beach, I did a project with Lucy Orta, connecting 100 kids here from Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade County into this performance. This is the end of the performance. They were very ready to get out of these silly suits. But she's all about connecting. She was trained as a fashion designer, but is an artist who's interested in how people live in cities and urban areas and connect or don't connect. Also, because we have a large design program or teach a lot of graphic design students, I've always done a certain number of design exhibitions, and this is 2 traveling exhibitions combined together at the same time. So what you saw in the hall was like 600 posters called Graphic Noise. And this is an exhibition, I can't remember the title, but the subtitles you're seeing here, Peace, Social Justice, Environment. Proud to say that one of our graduate students in design designed the gallery. Now, an important segue. You see a picture of me in 1967, and I note that I don't say I'm in Torrance, California, I say I'm in the South Bay, because the South Bay is a crucible of innovative surfboard manufacturing and simply surfing in the 1960s. That's an 8.6 Jacobs that was my first surfboard. I guess I'm about 12 or 13 years old. And this is me surfing in Mexico, I guess some 40 years later. My math serves me right. And while I was in the Northeast at Williams and in New York, put down or did not surf, I sort of had a rebirth in that actually while I was in New York. And traveling to go surfing really regenerated, or for me, making art, because I took a camera, I was always hanging it outside of the car, or in this case, this is the place we're staying. I didn't make these towels redder than they appear. They were just like that. It's a straight off photograph. I mean, I think I squared it up, actually. It was probably a horizontal image. And I was shooting a lot of these images out the window and making these kind of triptychs, cutting people's heads off. Not exactly sure what I was doing, somehow trying to connect the images, and taking a lot of pictures of telephone wires and clouds. And I started thinking about this guy again, John Copelands. John Copelands was the editor, and not that I have the kind of chops that John Copelands has, but he was the editor of Art Forum for many years, and then briefly the director of the Akron Art Institute. And at 60 years old, he decides to become an artist. But by the time he dies at 90, he is an internationally known photographer. And these images that you see of his aging body and not so pretty feet were blown up to the scale of, I want to say, abstract expressionist paintings or paintings of the time. So this foot would be 8 feet long, purposefully kind of further abstracted by those divisions. I also somehow thought I could make some photographs that related to Gene Davis. It didn't really make any sense, but this kind of horizontal format, vertical stripes. And this is actually what I came up with. It's not a work I would include in my portfolio, but maybe to show you the humbleness of where I came from. And one of the points of that previous photograph is, again, it was shot from the car. This is from something still that I'm walking by and taking repeated images. This is a vertical version. I fell in love with the vertical, as you will see, but definitely repetition, photographing things that are in my life. I'm not going, chasing around trying to make these photographs. This is some mesh that's on campus, and every time I'm driving by, I'm hanging the camera out the window to record these images. And at some point I get enough of them to assemble in the 2 ways that you've seen. Again, Ray Metzger, I did not invent this sort of methodology. These are two images by Ray Metzger who, in some ways I'm indebted to. I didn't really look at a lot of his work and try to make work like it, but it would be foolish not to know it, I feel. So I began making a lot of what I call road work. Oftentimes, if I'm going surfing to the Central Coast, which is a 2-hour drive, I'm hanging the camera out the window and I actually get pretty good at it. But I also take pictures of still subjects. And in some ways, I want to say, thank God, my wife, Terry Watson, in about 2012, returns to New York City. I had met her in New York City with my daughter, and she needs to be back in New York, and she gets a great job at City College. And so I'm back and forth, and this is actually one of the first successful New York pictures, in my opinion. The right-hand side of it is the sidewalk of New York with its smashed gum, and the left side is the ceiling of our condominium. Again, still images here, February moon. I'm basically in the space of a half an hour shooting these moons. I'm not really trying to make them different, but it's just the way the digital camera is working. Similarly here, I mean, maybe the lens has been adjusted a little bit because obviously you can see on the left side here, the moons are smaller than what you see on the right, but obviously it's also about that color. So now I'm going to come back to FAU to make a couple other points. One of them is working with students and teaching. This is the space where you first saw the Peggy Diggs thing, a work by Tim Curtis that I thought was so brilliantly designed for our university context. And a project here by Tom Cicluna, wherein I let him take part of the Schmidt Center Gallery, which is the gallery down at the end of this corridor, and put it on the wall. Because that's sort of what Tom does. He takes stuff and repositions it and calls it art. And the spacing of those elements is how it is on the ceiling. And this is the entrance to this particular exhibition. And now on the right-hand side, you're seeing what the ceiling looked like. And part of the reason that I let him take these tiles down, I can't even remember why he got that idea, but was because there had been some leakage and they were not in very good shape. And so I said, whatever, if you want to do that, let's do it. And I actually made this work from that piece. I mean, this is a little bit unusual, but you can see how it kind of fit into the program. On the left-hand side are images of the ceiling. On the right-hand side are the back of those panels that you can't see, the glue and the kind of insulation. So I'm getting a little bit better at hanging the camera out of the window. And again, on these trips, this is a diptych. The piece is about 50 inches high. I think, yes, here you see an installation. Again, speaking of privilege, I put myself into faculty exhibitions. Nobody has objected so far, but anyways, this was one of the first way I was presenting them. I really have struggled a lot with, these things are really crazy heavy because they have 1/4-inch plexiglass. This is another work actually made at very much the same time as the guardrail piece, a diptych, which I had referred very early on about telephone wires and the sky, just the freeway itself and these kind of construction cones. And then an issue that relates to geography, because I started, obviously I have thought more and more about, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Of course, I'm wedded to abstract formalism, but I am also very much wedded to photographic seeing. And this image happens to be of two different locations, Florida location on the left, New York location on the right. At a certain point, I stopped doing that because I feel like that's, I make this rule that things have to be coherent geographically, coherently in time. And this is an early one that is, it's the same subway station at 125th Street above ground, 125th and Broadway. So back to FAU and training students working with artists is a lot of what we do with certain kinds of exhibitions, artists giving non-public talks and informal studio settings, teaching students to interpret, interact with kids, both in the gallery setting and also sending FAU students out to places like the Boys and Girls Club, where we have a long-standing relationship. The images at the bottom are from that setting. And in this image in the middle, there's a student who is obviously presenting, but there's like 2 or 3 other students scoping her out who are a part of our program because she was relatively new, and she was actually quite good. But the idea that college students talking to students a little bit younger than them is a much different dynamic than some of these school kids might find in their area museum. The Florida Highwaymen, on the left side of the slide, you see these kind of salon style paintings. The Florida's Highwaymen are 26 African-American artists who actually have become quite famous because they made these pictures really quick, sold them along the highway in the 60s, 70s, and it made a living for them. And therefore they didn't have to work in basically the Jim Crow slave labor of Fort Pierce, which is where most of them came from. Well, they learned how to paint from this guy, Beanie Backus. You see his painting on the right. We got a Florida Humanities Council grant, and a lot of people know about the Highwaymen, and a lot of people know about Backus also, but at FAU, we have a bunch of Backus paintings. There really hadn't been any academic treatment of this social historical phenomena. And so working with faculty members at FAU, we actually brought a Black art historian, couldn't find one in Florida, unfortunately, to reflect on this phenomena, to reflect on the art. And the folks in the upper right are 3 contemporary artists from South Florida in a panel discussion, also talking about this phenomena of the Highwaymen. Because the galleries at FAU are the only kind of public exhibition space on campus, occasionally I have the license to do non-art exhibitions. And this is, I think, a really terrific example. And also joining exhibitions, because you'll see there was one across campus, but this is called Community Justice, the Black Panther Party and Other Civil Rights Movements. And as an exhibition of photographs and archival material from the 1967 Black Panther era. And also joined with an exhibition that you see here on the right by Sharon Daniel, a contemporary artist who deals with issues of mass incarceration. You see those targets on the ground. And you also, the flags are there because many prisons are factories for making these flags. Well, working with professors in our humanities or other disciplines, I don't want to say that art is not a humanities discipline, obviously it is, and obviously art history for sure, but doing multidisciplinary programming is something that just has really excited me. And on the occasion of these 2 exhibitions, we brought Angela Davis to campus to do a sold-out lecture in our largest lecture hall. And speaking of non-art exhibitions, I also in 2012 produced this exhibition, again with another Florida Humanities Council grant, about the history of surfing in Florida. The people at the Florida Humanities Council laughed at me when I first proposed this idea, like, sure, you're going to be able to get scholars to come and help you with this project because you can't do NEH or state humanities council projects without involving scholars. Well, yes, of course we could. And we ended up traveling the exhibition to 3 other venues in Florida. And actually we transferred the panels, the exhibition panels, to a surfboard history organization here in West Palm Beach, the Palm Beach County Surfing History Project. So back to some of my photographs in this kind of geographical locational time thing. This is, and I do go back and forth, like this is a New York photograph, this is a Florida photograph, but this does happen to be New York, as is this. These things, when I say they're geographic, these 2 phenomena that I'm photographing are like blocks away from each other photographed on the same day. Similarly, City College Blues, construction project at City College, which is around the block from where we reside in New York City. Whoops, another surfing picture, El Salvador, 2015. Well, at the same time, and I know that this is true of many artists, that I was making these pictures that are becoming somewhat typical perhaps. I start making these other pictures with a combination of my images and somewhat arbitrarily cut pictures from surfer magazines. And I'll try to expound on this arbitrariness. But they're called the surf works. They're about 2 feet square. And for this exhibition, which I am humbled to have had at the Hollywood Art and Culture Center in 2014, I did this sort of wall installation and tried to rough them up a little bit by presenting them on these varied backgrounds, and presented 2 of these other works, like the work on the right-hand side that's about 6 feet wide, a diptych. This is one of them. And then this is another one called Summer Jersey Rides, because that particular summer I was taking my daughter to endless softball tournaments in New Jersey. And these guardrails that were rusty, they were just calling out to me. So, and then I also decide maybe I should make some surfboards. This might be a way to loosen up, because a lot of the discussion with people about these things that I was making is, oh, the grid, what is the grid? It's so, it's so powerful. You can't get around it. It's stagnating. Or at least that was one reflection. I didn't necessarily feel that way, but you'll see that I try to break down the grid. But anyways, the fun thing about making the surfboard, indeed, it sort of loosened things up a little bit. Lots of mistakes, like the paint. It was printed on a really cheap printer. That is, it's this kind of Japanese tissue paper. And I work with this guy, Mike Pachonis, Bird Surfboards. He has been really kind in working with me on these things. So now I guess that you'll see what I'm talking about, that they get a little more refined. Sometimes you don't see the edges of the grids. They also do relate to the fact that I have often driven back and forth between Florida and New York. So that last one and this one they're shot in North Carolina early in the morning or something. Georgia blues. I never went too far with this. They're a little too, or Georgia blurs, excuse me. They're a little too Gerhard Richter, whereas this is a little more direct, right? And it's also not unusual that I make these things. I don't necessarily make them in pairs. I've already shown you a couple of things that are diptychs, but it's not unusual that I might make 2 or 3 of them. And so this one is slightly varied from the last one in this blue patch. A couple of them here that have this, I think, strong relationship. Oh, that's a yellow line of a highway, but also, has this kind of strong, I think, abstract patterning. Again, I veered far from the Gene Davis, but I think that I also, I still owe him something about this kind of vertical striping thing, ice dividers. So now I'm not shooting straight down at the freeway ground, but at these concrete dividers that are often used in construction projects or sometimes permanently to divide freeways. And also the color, like they're really not manipulated at all. Maybe when I finally get to printing them, I might try to make them a little clearer or sharpen them up and maybe saturate the hues a little bit, but I certainly don't go overboard. One like this to me really is at least half about the color, and it's mostly just the color that the camera renders. And I don't feel that I'm always in control of that device. I use it, but I'm not a camera techie guy. Warm Pavement, another one, both from 2015, where the pavement, just had this redness in it. So then another set of works that are coming off of those surf works that I mentioned, and here I'm not using any of my images. It's purely magazine images, mostly reverse, that is, they're negative images or reverse color. And they're called Surf Essence because I am married to a Black woman, and like Essence magazines are hanging around, just as the Surfer magazine. So they're sort of immediate visual resources. Again, they maybe channel that Robert Heineken energy. People have even said, why are you cutting up those women? That's not the way I feel about it, but I understand that some people might read them that way. And so they certainly have not continued, or they're not really, let's say, the mainstay of my work. And they actually were designed also. And I say designed, I mean, I feel very much that, I don't have a problem with that word. Artists design, they have to design. But they were designed to fit these found chemical trays, stainless steel, beautiful trays. Maybe the trays are more beautiful than the works, I'm not sure. They were also printed on some metal material, so somehow they're homogeneous to me. Another New York piece, subterranean orange, subway platform, tunneled. And again, this color is not, I'm not making this color. It's how it comes out of the camera. Maybe somebody could, might be able to explain it, but it's partly because it's having trouble rendering as I'm driving, but other parts, as you see on the right-hand side of this work, are being rendered more normally, or what we think is normal. Boynton Beach, I don't just surf in these exotic locations. Sometimes there's a nice little wave, or sometimes even bigger in South Florida. And actually, I failed to mention back at the surfing exhibition, history exhibition, that exhibition would not have been possible nor successful without the efforts of Paul Aho, a good friend of mine, who made the art for this second surfboard that I made with Mike Pachonis. So the deck art is work that Paul let me use. I sort of repeated it a few times, and the piece is sprinkled with paprika. That's what you're seeing on the bottom. So that blotchiness is real paprika into the resin. So now I'm going to make a little foray that attempts to describe or explain some of my photographic thinking, because in 2014, 2015, I did an exhibition called Alterations, Built, Blended, Processed. It's an exhibition that looked at 22, mostly American, but there were some international photographers and artists working in this same kind of abstract realm that I am interested in. I don't think that I'm doing something that's absolutely unique. I needed to know what's going on out there. Penelope Umbrico here makes works that she sources on Flickr. She's done this piece many times, and each time the piece is titled by how many sunset images there are on Flickr. And at the time of this exhibition, it was up to about 5 million. The first time she did it, it was only like 70,000 or something. But she doesn't use her own photographs. Mostly she sources them from other locations. Barbara Caston, the exhibition was multi-generational. Barbara Caston, in her 80s at the time, has been doing this kind of work, setup photography for the camera since the 70s, if not before. And I actually, in an essay that I wrote for the catalog, went back to that exhibition that I did with Daryl Curran and Eileen Cowan in the 70s called Object Illusion Reality, and talked about how this work, this is a 1967 work by Martis Grenier, like what's going on here? Well, what's going on is a very shallow space. And why does that towel, I don't know, maybe it doesn't look weird. Maybe it just looks dumb. There's just a towel hanging there, but I submit that it is surreal. Or that, and he purposefully is playing with abstraction. And he says, I want my photographs to yield abstractions, not to embody them. A couple other photographers from that show in the 70s, Leland Rice, a well-known LA photographer, shooting really flat, right? No perspectival illusion. The same thing with Harry Bowers here on the right, who actually was a scientist of sort and helped invent scanners. But this is simply a robe smashed onto that starred fabric and shot in 4x5 and made, I think it was like about 4 feet tall. And this is a James Welling, another one of the older artists in the show and a highly significant, recognized American artist. And he makes simultaneously different series. Some of the photographs he makes are very straight. This one, I think, falls into that same category as Martis Grenier and James Crump, who did a retrospective exhibition of his work, says that they're called the drapes. He's commenting on the drape series. The drapes possess an uncanny balance between levity and gravity, between constructed illusion and some hallowed, unknown trace. Both are an affirmation and an affront to photography's presumed powers to describe objects and reality. So that's the image in the installation view. A couple of other related, but not from that particular fabric series, by Welling. Maria Martina Cañas, who's a Miami-based artist, who has always done different kinds of montaging. This one's 8 foot square. Ellen Carey, who manipulates Polaroid technology to basically it's photographic technology to pull the ink across. Is it a photograph? Is it a painting? She calls it photography ground zero. And on the left-hand side, that's another Ellen Carey comprised of 12 prints. Here's Matthew Porter, grandson of Elliot Porter, a famous American photographer. Again, I remind you of Shallow Space. And then this is our other gallery, the Ritter Art Gallery. And I want to bring up this book, The Edge of Vision, The Rise of Abstraction and Photography, which was published at about the same time. I think it's 2013, Lyle Rexer. And Lyle Rexer says that, I love the name of the title, again, related to that Robert Irwin I showed you, like, where is the edge of that artwork? So the book is called The Edge of Vision. He proposes that photographic space is naturally put under pressure by, quote, the mere selection of an image. The elements of any image are intrinsically displaced, put under pressure. Another way to say that, in my words, is that many contemporary photographers are producing images that operate in a confined space, not unlike the celebrated flatness of modernist abstract painting. And Noriko Furunishi here is, to me, such a great example. When you first see it, maybe it seems like it's a landscape, but if you look closer, there's 2 or 3 different planar operations going on in there. This is more fabricated for the camera, or a combination of her own photographs that she puts into something that she sets up for the camera and eventually prints in this form. And finally, Travis Smiley, who really considers himself more of a painting, who's taking Play-Doh or colored clay and smashing it onto the bed of a scanner. And now to go back to my work, this is White Line, North Carolina. I can't get off those roads. This is a triptych, basically using the same images that you just saw in one horizontal piece, rearranged. Similarly, rough Carolina diptych. And generally, I want to say my works tend to be like 30 to 40 inches high. So I don't go too big with them. Sometimes I go a little bigger. This is Stuff on the Beach in El Salvador, as the title relates. Miami Horizon. Guttered and Saladita, My friend John McDonald, who I go surfing, wondered about this title. Saladita is a location in Mexico, and they had freshly painted all of the rain gutters. It rains a lot in some of these locations. You wouldn't necessarily know that they're rain gutters. And yellow to Walter, Carolina. Walter, because they were made on an excursion to return some paintings to a faculty member of ours who moved out of the area. So I'm going to hedge quickly towards trying to wrap this up, and also some work that might start looking like it's manipulated. And I hate that word, and I don't really think that that's what they are, but these are really like some overexposed images, right? A lot of white stuff, and not all of them are necessarily designed as finished products. But I'm showing them to you because I think you'll see them in other work. So here's a kind of variation going left to right where, the work is more manipulated on the right because I'm maybe posterizing things a little. But notice the work on the left when we go to, whoops, almost the next slide. But it's important to look at these also because these are collages that I've been making that come out of, I don't know, they're similar to those surfing collages, but obviously they're from Modern Furniture magazines or Metropolis magazine, but they've been cut arbitrarily. I did not decide where to make this vertical slice. I put them together after I have sliced them up. You can see how this photograph is laying over one of these collages, if you will. And another, just maybe to give you a little better idea, on the left, you see just two pieces that have been put together. Again, I simply joined them because, hey, they're red. On the right, you see that I've made this little collage, but then I've repeated it a couple of times in design, I'm pretty sure. This work incorporates that red furniture element that you saw. So I'm starting to break out a little bit of this kind of gridded highway roadwork stuff and using these other forms. This is an installation at yet another faculty exhibition. While this one is very similar, the photographic blue element, it is just that from my camera, but it functions, I believe, in the same way that those furniture elements. I mean, somebody suggested to me that these little collages could be works unto themselves. And I've actually thought that, I don't know, I've thought about that a lot. I haven't done much about it. That one obviously is used in this piece. Seated Spanish Harlem. Again, the seating is about the chair in the background. Decorator's Miss. I don't usually go quite this colorful. And finally, Seated Amalgam, which actually use one of those images you saw previously, and yet another collage to take us into what I call the works in four. So somehow by working with those forms, those furniture forms that are a little bigger, I just made myself stop making the works that had hundreds of little squares, right? And but somehow I decided that I was going to do these four. So this is indeed 4 images, and there's a bunch of them. This one horizontal, but it's basically 4 images. Some of the stuff in the background of this is not really there. So to some degree, it's layered in Photoshop. And some of them you see more or less of the grid. I'm not trying to hide the grid. In fact, I'm very happy about it, and I'm just going to other subject matter here. This is more domestic, right? It's the pool hose in my backyard and the terrific moons that we sometimes get. And again, this one, like, you can almost not see that it's in 4s, but I assure you that some aspect of it was made in the 4s, whereas this one, it's more clear, but it has a similar pattern to the one that you just saw before. Complementary barriers is really pretty straightforward, but obviously this overlapping of the 4s. This one, even, like, I'm a little bit proud of because I shot it from the car, but it feels not so, it's relatively detailed and sharp. And then I still continue to go back to works not unlike what I had made before, because they just somehow happened before me, a train going by at night. All of the images for this were made in one fell swoop. And then whereas this one is one that I didn't print for 4 years, although I had made it in some sense that long ago. This is another part of my privilege. I get to print photographs at FAU in this studio. I was in a show at Palm Beach, the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County, called Modern Love. So I kind of tweaked the color a little bit. I happen to be working with these palm fronds. It's hard for you probably to see that those are palm fronds, but they're palm fronds that look like the brown part of this photograph, but they've been flipped in color. Similarly, there's some guy in my neighborhood who puts all these eggs on his tree, and I've made a bunch of works, or tried to. In fact, this is a remake of a early, like 2012 photograph that I have collaged over. And you see here a view on the left of my studio where I've done that to a few other previous photographs. In fact, the one on the left is one of the first photographs I showed you. And you know, the blue tape on this is intended to stay. It will stay. Variants of sometimes what I get in the camera, caramelizing Harlem. You know that Harlem has been gentrified. My wife and I are part of that, I suppose. Another piece out of New York. Again, locational. These two sets of photographs are taken very close to the same time, you know, within, I want to say within, I don't know, 2 doors from each other. Although my rules are not that strict, but this one also fits that bill. This is not a scene you saw, but one I put together. So recently, because this is very exciting to me, exhibition that I had recently at the Arts Warehouse, thanks to Giannina Dwin, who is the curator. The exhibition is called Polyopia. You can look up the definition, but it does have something to do with repetitions. And for the exhibition, I decided that, hey, I need to do something improvisational or installation-wise. You got to get some of this design exhibition stuff into the presentation of your work. And that's my next challenge in a way. So anyways, I wallpapered one of the walls with pendaflexes, which in part are a tribute to my age and filing. I've put my hands on a lot of those things. And also this element that is going up the wall there is something made from surplus elements and coffee and clear latex behind those circles. And this is one of the works in the show, as is this. And that, which is kind of a hybrid here. You see some furniture back there, maybe. That's where that maroon color is coming from. And then how it looked in the installation. Tape, cautioned. So I'm going to flip through, like, I don't know, a few more images, and then I think I need to stop because it's 8:06. I'm going to stop talking for a second. My studio at FAU, another part of my privilege of working there for 20 years at substandard wages. Backyard dramas. Desert Daughter Dreams partly relates to a drive across the American desert. Los Llanos is, and oh God, anyways, I'm gonna stop. So thanks so much.
This has been totally wonderful. Just wonderful. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you very much, Ellie. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys all for attending. It's really heartwarming. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you all soon.
Yes, you can see all of the hand clapping. I did want to tell you before everyone turns their computer off and goes home that our next art salon is January 5th And Lisa Rockford will be speaking. Many of you know her as an artist and as a curator and as an educator, all three of which Rod is also. She's had a huge impact on artists and art in South Florida over many years. She's very much an art advocate. It's going to be very exciting to hear her talk. It's January 5th. And the other thing I wanted to say is it just dawned on me today that this is Miami Art Week. And so we are part of Miami Art Week. Thank you all for coming. Yay. And good night.
Thank you very much.